All right, well, hi everybody, and welcome to the Wild Neighbors Speaker Series. I'm really happy to have y'all today. This series is a collaboration with Travis County Natural Resources, who co-manages the Balcones Canyonlands Preserve with us, as well as a number of other public and private partners who also co-manage the BCP as well. Before we get started, I just want to introduce myself. I'm Jaya Torres with the City of Austin's Wildland Conservation Division. And today, speaking for us, we have the City of Austin biologist and tract manager, Jonny Scalise, who's going to talk about the endangered Golden-cheeked Warbler. After the presentation, Jeremy Hull with Travis County will manage a Q&A session. So put any questions that you have into the Q&A box, and we'll try to address as many of them as we can after the presentation. And there's also going to be a recording of the presentation posted to Travis County and Austin Wildlands Facebook pages and YouTube channels. All right, I'm going to hand it over to Jonny.
My name is Jonny Scalise, and I'm going to be presenting all about Golden-cheeked Warblers today. So first, a little bit about me. I am a biologist for the Balcones Canyon Preserve, like Jaya just mentioned. I have a master's in wildlife ecology, where I studied the diet of the Texas tortoise seen here. I've always had an interest in animal behaviors, and so that's kind of what guided me to through my career. After getting my master's, I did seasonal biologist work in 2011 and 2012 with Golden-cheeked Warblers. And since 2012, I've been working with the City of Austin as a biologist, where I've gotten to know the Golden-cheeked Warblers really well. So the Balcones Canyonlands Preserve, where I work, it was created by the BCCP, which is the Balcones Canyonlands Conservation Plan, with the goal of setting aside land for endangered species. There's a target of 30,000 acres in Travis County. So not only does this protect land for Golden-cheeked Warblers, but it also protects lands for black-capped vireos and 6 endangered karst invertebrates, so bugs, basically, that live in caves. Here's 2 of them on our little logo here. And the preserve also protects all the community, the wildlife community that also inhabits these lands. We're often confused with the Balcones Canyonlands National Wildlife Refuge because of our similar name. They're a little bit further to the west of here in Austin, but they were created by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to help reach the minimum viable size for the Golden-cheeked Warblers. So they have nearly identical goals, setting aside land for endangered species, and it's their target is 40,000 acres. So it's just more land with a similar name, but a different entity, and we're often confused. The Balcones Canyonlands Preserve is not just a single preserve, but it's actually a system of preserves owned and managed by multiple partners, including City of Austin, where I work, Travis County, Sunset Valley, there's Wild Basin, LCRA, Travis Audubon, Nature Conservancy, West Cape Preserve, and on this map here, you can sort of see the system of preserves. So there's a bunch of smaller units that kind of add up to being the full Balcones Canyonlands Preserve. Many of these lands are spaces that you may know as being a Austin resident or having been in the Austin area. Places like the Barton Creek Greenbelt down here in the south end of the preserve is a lot of that is parkland, but it also serves the dual purpose as being preserve land for our endangered species. So the endangered species that I'm going to be talking to you about today is the Golden-cheeked Warbler. So I wanted to go into some basics about the warbler before I go into more detail. They are a migrant songbird in the class Aves, which just means birds, basically. Order is Passiformes, which is the perching birds, which is a very large order in the class Aves. And then within the Passiformes, they are in the family Parulidae, which is the warblers, New World warblers, which is a very cool and diverse group of birds, kind of all similar in a way, but a lot of different specializations and very vibrant plumages. The scientific name for the golden-cheeked warbler is Setophagia chrysoperea. Setophagia is from Greek meaning moth and phagia, eating. So there's several different species within Setophagia, and they all kind of derive from this group of birds that were first kind of observed as eating moths. And so that's kind of how they got that name originally. And chrysoperea, the specific epithet for golden-cheeked warblers, is very on the nose. It just means gold cheek. A lot of times in our writings, we use their banding code, or how we refer to them in short, with just banding code is always a 4-letter combination of letters that represents the name of the species. And for golden-cheeked warbler, it's GCWA. They're relatively small birds. The total length from bill to tail is about 5 inches. Their wingspan is about 7.75 inches, weighing in at just under 10 grams. For reference, they're about 3 times the size of your hummingbirds that you'd see in this area. So really quite small, kind of dainty, lightweight birds. They are insectivorous, and you don't often see them on it. You know, they're frequent in their habitat, but they are easily missed because they're small and kind of secretive, but you do often hear them in the right areas. That's kind of how we rely on finding them, is by following their song. So they have at least 2 different main song types. There's the A song, which is kind of written out here, but it's an ascending series of buzzy, high-pitched calls with a quick drop, and then another buzzy calls, kind of like buzz, 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 bee, buzz. That's the A song. There's also the B song, which is kind of more variable. There's always going to be regional dialects, but we kind of see that the B song has more variation between individual birds, almost kind of changes with their mood as well. But generally, if you were to generalize it, it's going to be 4 or 5 little phrases that kind of go up and down, kind of like buzz, bee, Scalise. That would be like a 4-note bee song. Some birds only use a 3-note bee song, or some prefer to just cut it off at 2 notes. You're going to have a lot of variation with that. And what's interesting is we see birds that one bird will pick up a unique song, and it kind of progresses through the community over time, where maybe the neighbor learns that same song and starts singing it back and forth. And the next year we might have multiple birds that are kind of using that new song. And so there's this interesting thing that we're observing, where the songs are kind of changing over time. Some of that, I think, has created this new variation we're calling a C song. Pretty variable and kind of hard to pin down, because there is so much regional differences, and even from one side of the preserve to the other, there could be differences. but generally it's kind of like a B song mixed with parts of an A song. They'll often kind of include a trill in there. Kind of interesting thing that we're still in the process of describing as biologists. They also have a call note, which is similar to many other warblers. It's a sharp chip note or tick. But when they're not singing, they can use their chip notes for different vocal interactions, like alarm calling or contact calling, etc. Here's a male singing his little song. So further into their identification, both the male and female are going to be distinguished by their bright golden yellow face, which extends beyond just their cheek. It's above their eye and kind of beyond their ears. And they have a straight or solid black line kind of that starts at the beak and goes through the eye to the back of the head. The male golden-cheeked warblers will have a mostly black back. The older the male, the more black generally. So black crown, black back, a throat that's for older males it's going to be all black, and that the amount of black can vary for younger males. For females, that are going to be quite similar, but some of the differences are the amount of black. So most of the time, the black on the crown and back is kind of speckled. Some of the feathers are partially black, which kind of gives this greenish hue of a mix of black and yellow feathers. And then their throats are going to be even more variable. Some females are very lightly throated with just like a white or just yellow. But it's going to be unique to individual birds. And the plumage can really vary between individuals. These are some preserved specimens, but they're really helpful for showing the range in plumage. So here on the left, we have birds that on the upper top of the left kind of look like males. Down here you have your lighter birds that are more obviously females. But some of the females get bearded and you can sort of easily confuse them as males if they're not singing. I mean, the females don't sing. So when the males are not singing, they can be confused with females, especially when they look like this. So here on the right side are males, and some of the males here can be quite light in color. So those are the ones that are easily confused with females when they're not singing. There is also close relatives to the golden-cheeked warblers that can be easily confused, especially in spring when they're migrating through the black-throated green warbler. They look and sound like golden-cheeked warblers. Their songs are kind of different but similar and could be mistaken if you're not super familiar with golden-cheeked warblers. Sometimes I hear a black-throated green and my first thought is golden-cheeked warbler, and I also get confused. But they're going to have that similar black throat, yellow face. They don't have the black crown and back. They will have varying amounts of black in their crown and back, but it's usually kind of black and yellow, kind of giving that greenish tinge. They'll also have yellow around the vent, kind of behind their legs on the underside, whereas golden-cheeked warblers are pure white underneath. So golden-cheeked warblers, where do they live? During the breeding season, all golden-cheeked warblers will be in Texas, unless there's some rare bird that got lost along the way. But in central Texas is where the golden-cheeked warblers breed, and as a result, all golden-cheeked warblers are Texan. They're all born in Texas. the only species of bird where all individuals are from Texas. Their wintering range is here in blue. It's southern Mexico and northern Central America. So more on the wintering range. Their habitat in the winter range is kind of these highland forests that are pine and oak mixed in Mesoamerica. So here's southern Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, Nicaragua. And here's a kind of an example of what that habitat looks like. There's many different species of oaks in their habitat that they rely on. Much of this information I have from the Alliance for the Conservation of Pine Oak Forests of Middle America, Mesoamerica, where our colleagues and study the golden-cheeked warblers. In parts of their wintering range, they're called El Chipe Mejia Dorada, which is Spanish for golden-cheeked warbler. However, chipe is the common term down there for what we call warblers, which is pretty cool kind of name structure, because warbler, a warbling song implies that they're a singing type, but they only sing in relation to breeding territory defense. So in the wintering range, they're not breeding, so they're not singing. They're only using their chip calls. And as a result, they're not called warblers in their wintering range. They're called chipes. And they are one among many chipes. There is the Townsend's warbler, hermit warbler, black-throated green warbler, all of these species that have different ranges in North America. On the wintering grounds, they're all kind of in the same area, and they form these foraging flocks where they kind of move together through the forest on the hunt for food. And there might be one, maybe two golden-cheeked warblers in a single foraging flock, and that flock kind of mostly sticks together and kind of moves through the forest together, kind of using group mentality, where they can kind of alert each other to predators and things like that. So this group of four is kind of like the most closely looking to golden-cheeked warblers, but there's many other species of warblers, some migrant and some not, that are also parts of these foraging flocks, and not just warblers, there's several other species. Here on this map from eBird, which is based off of observations that people make and share online, we can see their wintering range in blue, and this green is kind of places based on places they've been observed in migration. Migration is not well studied. There's been very recent studies that are using geo-trackers on individual birds to kind of help get us more information about what routes they're using. But what we do know is they tend to kind of hug along the Sierra Madre Oriental here in Mexico as they come up into central Texas for the breeding range. And kind of along this migration route, they rely on the coniferous forests there for food. So a lot of species will cross the Gulf of Mexico, and we don't really believe that golden-cheeked warblers are making those large jumps. Their migration is more kind of hopscotching, where they'll fly at night on clear skies usually, and then kind of rest during the day and refuel for the next night. They'll leave kind of early to late February, or start leaving then, and they'll arrive any day now. So we're at the beginning of March here in Austin, and people are out looking for golden-cheeked warblers right now. There haven't been any reported yet, but they could be arriving any day now. and their arrival will kind of be sequential. So first the males will arrive and establish territories, and then the females arrive. So when they arrive on the breeding grounds, it kind of looks like this. Got large patches of mature closed canopy juniper oak woodlands. So that's ash juniper and a variety of oak species. And the males, usually the older males arrive first, and they start to kind of set up their territories. They almost always return to the same area that they defended the year previously. But young males have to kind of push their way in and find gaps where they can claim their own territory. The breeding season is kind of a huge time crunch. It's a race against the clock in my eyes for these birds, where their sole purpose for being here is to reproduce and create offspring. So there's a lot of competition for resources. This view here shows all these light green trees are going to be like Texas red oak that are leafing out. So this is what it's about to look like here. And there's this interesting process that happens as part of this time crunch where as the different species of oaks leaf out, they create a time-based food source for the golden-cheeked warblers to help them provide for breeding. So what is the food? What do they eat? Here's a golden-cheeked warbler male holding a food. That's a little caterpillar that he's captured. It's really fun to watch them forage and eat when they capture these caterpillars. Sometimes they'll eat them whole while they're still wiggling, but usually they'll quickly kill them by like kind of whacking them on a branch with their beak before gobbling them down. And caterpillars are going to be like kind of their main food source when they're here. And caterpillars of moths, as well as butterflies. Here's a juniper lacewing and its larva, which kind of mimics the look of juniper needles. But golden-cheeked warblers are really great at looking and foraging on caterpillars and bugs that live in these parts of the trees. Excuse me. And they've kind of evolved to be able to do this. So they're lightweight, kind of helps them hang out on the ends of these branches where the fresh leaves are coming in. The fresh leaves are soft, so the butterflies and moths lay their eggs on these leaves so that the young caterpillars can have fresh food that's soft leaves. Golden-cheeked warbler feet are kind of help them grasp these tiny twigs. They have these long toes. And they kind of hop through the canopy and forage for bugs. Part of that time crunch is the food availability kind of changes over time. So at the beginning of the season, there's a huge flush of caterpillars, but that variety of food kind of changes over time. And so they also take advantage of other insects that will be in these areas. So katydids, grasshoppers, spiders, pretty much anything that they can find that's bugs. If it's small enough that they can eat it, they will. I've seen a golden-cheeked warbler try to get a katydid, and the katydid was so big that the golden-cheeked warbler spent about 5 minutes trying to process it so that it could get it down, and it finally did. So like I was saying, when the golden-cheeked warblers arrive, they will be trying to set up territories. And so they're very territorial. They will kind of defend their territories. And so how does they defend a territory. What does that mean for a bird? It's kind of like a showdown where one's saying, are you looking at me? Are you looking at me? They really don't want to fight. It's kind of dangerous to get into a physical altercation for these birds. You can strain your wing, you can lose an eye. So they do everything that they can to prevent these physical altercations. And the way they do that is by singing. So their songs are them kind of saying, this is my tree, don't come over here. And they will often use their bee song to announce this. And they'll kind of move around the territory using their song to kind of mark what's theirs. And the territories can overlap, you know, when one bird is on one end of the territory, another bird might be in part of his territory, but he's over here yelling at this guy. And so this bird can kind of temporarily also use this area that's part of this male's territory. And so this territoriality is really important for us as researchers to be able to capture and band the Golden-cheeked Warblers. I'll get into that in a minute. So how do we study them? On the BCP, we use intensive monitoring, where we have these representative sample plots. Most of them are about 100 acres, kind of in the square shape. This is this red portion of one of our 100-acre plots, where we're going out multiple times a week in high-density plots to try to determine how many birds are there. And that's a hard question to answer. But through these repeated intensive monitoring efforts, we can kind of learn how many birds are there during the season. So each of these little circles represents a bird. Each number is a different bird that was observed. And so with banding, we can help parse out which birds are which. So they have their banding codes on this little field map that's been written. And you hear the bird singing, you go to where the bird is singing and you try to get eyes on it with your binoculars and determine which bird it is so that you can identify how many there are. And part of this intensive monitoring is that we're also searching for their nests and monitoring their nests so that we can determine reproductive rates. And then we're able to use these sample plots that we've had to kind of extrapolate across the rest of the preserve. So we have the plots kind of set up in representative habitat types across the preserve. And we wouldn't be able to do any of this well without banding. Banding also tells us return rates and survivorship of individual birds, and we kind of learn about how the birds are doing over time that way. We can learn about their territory sizes. So here's this male blue, orange, blue, silver, and he's using this area. We've learned that in poor quality habitat, the birds have larger territories because they have to go further to get the food that they need. We also learn about territory density, where in high quality habitat, the birds don't need as much space to find the food that they need. And so there's able to be more birds in small areas. We also learn about age structure. So this is kind of our map that we have at the end of the field season, where each of these polygons, these little shapes, is a different bird's territory. And we now know how many birds per this 100-acre plot, and then we can extrapolate that. So here's the banding photo right after the bird is banded. So this bird's got his 4 color bands on his leg: red, silver, yellow, green. So how do we band? How do we even catch them? This is a very common question for us. Well, we use these fine mist nets. Here is me for scale next to one of our nets. We have these portable poles that we build a frame, kind of a temporary net lane, essentially, where we're going to place the net. And well, because the birds are territorial and we kind of have an idea of where their guarded territories are, when we play their song in their territory, they become defensive. They try to chase out the intruder, and as a result fly into the net, where we capture them, carefully extract them, and apply the bands. Before we do any of this, we laid out the bands that we're going to use so that we can handle them for the shortest amount possible. Every silver band, the aluminum bands, has a band number. It's a USGS issued band. And then each bird gets a unique color combination. So here's kind of our color options for the bands. We'll use special banding pliers to attach the bands to their legs. It's like a little C-shaped ring, and the banding pliers just kind of close the ring around their leg. We'll also record their age, sexual characteristics, etc. during this time. And then we have a banded bird, you release them, and then the next time you see that bird, you know it's that bird. How do you age them? So when we're handling them, we kind of pour over really quickly some key characteristics, and then we can assign them one of these age classes. Hatch year is the year the bird is born, and second year is a 1-year-old bird. So hatch year is its first year here on the breeding grounds, and a 1-year-old bird that returns, that's his second year here on the breeding grounds. For the most part, when we capture a bird, we're really only able to determine if it's their second year here or if it's after their second year here. Once we band them, and they return after that, then we can kind of delve into these more detailed aging classifications, like third year, after third year, fourth year, etc. But for the most part, we're only able to tell between second year and after second year based on plumage characteristics. So there's these, the second year birds retain some of their original feathers that they put on fresh out of the nest. And because of that, they're lower quality feathers. They have some slight differences compared to mature birds. So every bird after second year is considered mature, and their plumage characteristics are going to all be identical. Second year birds are going to have these median covert feathers with these black shaft streaks. So the rachis, the middle of the feather, is going to be black, whereas on mature birds or after second year birds, they do not have that shaft streak. The tail feathers are kind of more ratty looking on second years. Mature birds will have kind of better quality feathers, and so you can kind of assess the quality of the feathers. Also, mature birds are going to have more white. So on the second year birds, there's only the outer 3 feathers have white. Here on a mature bird, the outer 4 feathers have white. And retrix is a tail feather, so the retrices here will vary between second year and after second year males. There'll also be kind of this color contrast where the inner primary coverts are going to be kind of brownish in comparison to the freshly molted greater coverts, which are going to be black. Whereas on the mature birds, there's less of that color contrast. Okay, so the males have arrived. They've set up their territories. They're guarding their territorials. And then a couple weeks later, the female Golden-cheeked Warblers are going to arrive. When the females arrive, the males are going to be doing their best to attract them. So the females kind of bounce from territory to territory until they settle with a specific male, and they've kind of mated, or they do mate. And once they're paired, they're considered each other's mate. The males will kind of guard that female they'll chase away other males from that female. Do they mate for life? Some birds do. Golden-cheeked warblers are not one of them. When the females are laying their eggs, they will actually kind of move around the territory, chipping, almost like calling for their mate. And this chipping attracts the neighboring males, often from, I've seen males from 300 meters away to these chip notes that the females give off. And they're looking to mate with the females who are fertile while they're laying their eggs. So even though they're paired, sometimes the males are out looking for extra pair copulations where they are successful in pairing with a second female. Some females unknowingly pair with a male who already has a mate. And so the one male will have two females that he's guarding in his territory. Females will even have multiple mates. It's less obvious. We don't really have a lot of observations of this, but we have seen, thanks to banding, we've seen two different males coming to the female's nest to bring food for the nestlings. So we believe that it's likely that they have, genetic connections to those nests for them to be inspired to bring food to them. Where do they put their nests? Usually it's it can be on the slopes or on the uplands. They'll use, most of the times the nests are in juniper trees, but they can be in other trees too. Oaks or live oaks are like the next highest nest trees that we've seen. They're usually in like the upper third of the tree in a fork, and they're often very well obscured because they're made of juniper bark. When they're in a juniper tree, they're extra well hidden. So once the site is selected to build the site, the female gets busy building, and she's a very busy bird during this period. She uses juniper bark, this kind of flaky bark here, to build the frame of the nest. She kind of builds a little mat at the bottom of the crotch where she's going to put the nest, and she kind of works her way up there and kind of weaves together pieces of bark. It's kind of very fine, flaky bark to build a cup, and then she'll line that cup with soft materials. Here's a female collecting little grasses and hairs that she's going to line that nest with. They'll use feathers, even trash sometimes, like if you've seen cloth in warbler nests, but they're out there looking for anything that's soft they can find to line that nest with. And you can see the little hairs that they found sticking out of the nest. The nest size is about, kind of like baseball size, roughly. Here's my hand for reference. It's going to be a cup. It's always going to be cup shaped. And this was a nest that had fallen out of a tree from a year prior. Once the nest is fully built, which takes them about 5 days, they'll get to laying. They might take a day of rest or two, and then the females will start laying their eggs. They lay most of the time 4 eggs, but sometimes 3. Very rarely we've detected that they've laid 5 eggs. The eggs are, very small, less than 2 centimeters long by 13 millimeters wide. And like I was saying earlier, during this egg laying period where they're laying 1 egg each day, they pretty much only go to the nest once. The rest of the time they're out foraging and mating with their males. The males get really quiet during this time period. as they're guarding their female from other males. Once egg laying is complete, is when the female starts incubating. The males do not help with the incubation phase. They did not help with the nest building phase. The incubation stage takes 11 to 12 days. And the female is going to spend most of her time sitting on this nest. She'll leave like once an hour to go forage, preen, kind of drink water. But she's going to spend most of her time kind of hunkering down on this nest. You can sort of see her peeking over the rim of this nest. And here's her little tail sticking up in the back. During this time is kind of an interesting time because you don't see a lot of trips to and from the nest. You end up watching the birds do other things. Some exciting things I've seen them do is leaf bathing. So, you know, in the summer here, it gets hot. We don't have rain all the time. Their little drainages that they get water can dry up. So when it rains, they're almost excited. And I've seen them kind of playfully bathe in the water that collects on the leaves after a rain. I've seen some birds sunning themselves. I think it's part of like a parasite removal where they kind of spread out their feathers and just kind of stare into the sun. It's very exciting to watch them be so still that way. I've also seen birds using ants, called anting, where they kind of pick off ants and kind of rub them on themselves. The idea there being that the formic acid from ants helps kill parasites. If they've made it this far, after the 12th day, the baby birds start hatching. So you often can tell this when you see a male warbler or female starting to carry food. So here's male, he's kind of processed his kill, but he's not eating it. He's gonna carry it from tree to tree as he moves his way to the nest to bring food to the babies. The babies start out super tiny and naked. They can barely lift their heads. By day 3, their eyes are barely opening, but they're growing fast. At day 4, they become active and strong. Their eyes are open. Day 5, they're starting to get some signs of feathers, and their crouching behavior kicks in. Day 6, their primaries, their feathers, have unsheathed. By day 8, they're almost fully feathered. Their tail is now about 6 millimeters long, and wing bars can become obvious, starting to look like birds. But they don't always make it to the stage. There are interruptions that happen. Predation is probably the most common interruption, where the nest contents, either the eggs or the nestlings, get eaten by a predator. But sometimes the nest is just abandoned for whatever reason, and we're not able to tell why. If weather events like a heavy rainstorm, you know, most of the time the nests, they are solid through a heavy storm, but occasionally they do get knocked out. So here's a nest that was knocked out of its tree, and so it's tipped over sideways and all the contents had poured out. Some of the common nest predators that we've seen on nest monitoring footage, probably the most common is Texas rat snakes. Various hawk species have been known to eat nests contents. Corvids like Woodhouse's scrub jay, crows, even blue jays have been seen eating nestlings. Various mammals, pretty much anything that can reach them can and will eat the nestlings, including squirrels. Even red imported fire ants have been known to predate nestlings. But all's not lost. They will try again. So nestling cycle round 2. it's kind of on that time crunch now though, so they're running out of food resources as time goes on, and the second round is going to be rushed. They're going to do everything they can to make it go by faster. So often the nests are built faster, sometimes in 2 or 3 days instead of 5. So they're kind of less thickly walled or less clean looking. Same materials. Sometimes they will only lay 3 eggs, so it only takes 3 days for the egg laying phase. Incubation, they can't change, that's set in stone how long the babies require incubation. Nestling, that doesn't change. You know, if there is an interruption in round 2, they might try round 3 or even 4 tries to successfully rear young. So all of this is the same as an earlier round, but this time, yay, they've reached day 9 of nestling and the babies are ready to leave the nest. So here's a little baby Golden-cheeked Warbler who's 1 day out of the nest. They're usually very quiet, hard to see, but when the parents come near, they will start begging loudly for food, saying, feed me, feed me, feed me. And the parents obey. Here's the mom, Golden-cheeked Warbler, feeding her baby. One of our goals as the biologists is to try and determine how many birds leave each nest. So when we see 1, we assume there's more, and we try to find the second baby or the third or the fourth, and they kind of can be really hard to find because they can go in any direction, and they're very small and camouflaged and easy to not see. You know, this is typically an arboreal species, but the babies are not great flyers, and so they are often near the ground, which makes them even more susceptible to predation. You know, if everything goes well on round 2, we have documented second brooding, where the male kind of slowly takes over the feeding responsibility, and the female will start building a second nest. And this is super great for the birds when they're able to get off a second nest. That means that they have the ability to produce 8 offspring or more. So once in incubation, the male does all the feeding. It can be kind of chaotic, so I might be thinking, what did I get myself into? Once they've fledged, they rapidly develop. By day 12, they have an adult-length tail. Day 19, their yellow face appears on their face. And by day 28, they're really independent. They're starting to capture their own food, and their yellow is extending behind the eye. So once the nesting season ends, they begin molting, and song rates rapidly decrease. Why are they endangered? Golden-cheeked Warblers are habitat specialists, which means they require mature ash juniper trees to build their nests. And trees take at least 20 years to mature. And they have a very limited breeding range. They only breed in Central Texas, and much of that is in Travis County. So here's a Golden-cheeked Warbler range, and for comparison, similar species, but they have these huge ranges in comparison. So you can see that, you know, there's only so much space that the birds can use, and when that space is gone, it's gone for a while. Some of the threats are myths about juniper trees. There's thoughts that they're water hogs, or they're non-native, or nothing grows under them, but things grow under them, and they're native. Golden-cheeked Warblers have evolved alongside ash juniper trees to use their bark. There's a lot of negative attitudes about cedar. You know, people have cedar fever from juniper pollen, but other trees have pollen as well, and people are allergic to that. There's a lot of concern about fire risks from juniper trees, but generally, it's more wet under juniper trees, and so there's less risk of fire most of the time from juniper being on the landscape. Increasing urbanization has huge impacts for golden-cheeked warblers, so it's causing direct impacts from habitat loss. You know, birds running into cars or buildings is a big concern. But there's also indirect impacts from urbanization, like fragmentation that increases predators, you know, like rat snakes tend to be more around urban areas. Pollution, changes to their community from, you know, if there's more rat snakes, then that could have other compounding effects. Another problem is they require oaks in their habitat, and there's threats to oak trees. Here, this is a deer exclosure fence. On the inside, there's a lot of small oaks that are growing. On the outside, the deer have completely browsed them away. Feral hogs are becoming a more increasing problem. They, you know, eat all the acorns. Oak wilt is a fungal disease that is killing oak trees. Climate changes, you know, the more global weirding that happens, there's more severe events. We see a drought causing juniper die-off. Crazier storms are knocking trees over. Hotter and wetter years could be causing increased pests and diseases for warblers. But how are they doing overall? Here's our results from a 5-year study. Essentially, as total woodland cover and canopy height and mixed woodlands increase, we have increased in golden-cheeked warbler densities. Adult males survive about 0.57 per year, and juvenile estimate is about 0.28 per year. The longest known male is about 9 years old, but most only live 2 to 3 years. Population viability analysis from Duarte et al. Found that, you know, large scale habitat has occurred, and immigration is kind of driving local population dynamics. You know, conserving large tracts of habitat is warranted, just like we found in our study. This kind of also backs up what we've seen, where here the orange line is the total number of territories, which, you know, over time it looks consistent, but with banding, we were able to show that the return rate is not always on par. So one of our big things that we can do to help protect golden-cheeked warblers is preserve their habitat. You know, I think changing the perception about juniper trees is really important. So with that, is there any questions?
Thanks very much, Johnny. It was a great presentation. We do have a couple questions. Before we get to those, I put some links into the chat, some resources for you all, BCP interactive map, story map, and some other things for y'all if you want to check those out. But I'll hand it over to Jeremy for Q&A.
Great, thank you, Jayat. So Johnny, we got a bunch of questions, not a bunch, we got several questions here in the Q&A, and we've got about 7 or 8 more minutes left for our hour, so we'll probably go a little rapid fire here. But the first one is, when you were talking about, you were showing all the specimen birds and the variations in plumage, the question came up, are there the light colored males juvenile birds, molting birds, breeding, or is it just strictly variation in their adult plumages?
I think the light colored males are generally the younger males. So like second year males are gonna have that lighter plumage.
Excellent. When you were talking about them singing, how long do they sing during the year, like particular months? And then also, can you identify the golden-cheek by the chip calls or only by its song?
The chip calls can help. It's really hard to identify them by that. So there's other species that have similar songs, but over time you can kind of attune your ear to it and you sort of can identify it, but you have to have a lot of practice. And they sing pretty much the whole time they're in the breeding range. But towards the end of the breeding season, the song rates really drop. There's also different time periods, like during incubation, they're not singing as often because they're not so worried about other males encroaching on their female during that time.
Perfect. Do you do any passive acoustic monitoring?
I do not personally, but some of our collaborators do.
Cool. I thought this one was pretty interesting. Are golden-cheeked warblers the only bird in our area that use ash juniper bark in their nests?
Definitely not. No, it's a lot of species do. I've seen it in other warbler species nests, like black and white warbler, which are ground nesters, cardinal nests. Many species take advantage of that kind of substrate for building nests with, but golden-cheeked warblers are specialized for it.
Okay. The other warblers in our area that look similar to the golden-cheeked, do they also have similar nest and egg colors?
So in our area, the black-throated green warbler is the most similar looking one, and they don't breed here. But I would suspect that, they're close relatives. I would suspect their nests are pretty similar, and egg color would probably be similar as well.
All right. When you were talking about round 2 nesting, do they all do round 2, or do they only do round 2 if the first one is lost due to predation or something like that?
So yeah, if the first one is lost, they'll try for subsequent attempts. That's the whole purpose of being here, is to try to reproduce. And a second brood is kind of a different thing than a round 2, essentially. Usually only the ones who are successful on their first nests will even have time to try for a second brood.
Okay. When you were talking about climate change and its effect, is it affecting when the migration happens? And then also, is their range extending northward at all, like we're seeing with some other birds?
No, I don't think we've seen any range extensions for golden-cheeked warbler. They're really limited to where ash juniper occurs. And as far as the migration timing, I'm not sure that it has shown any changes in the timing. It seems like they're kind of keying in on amount of daylight to be there when they're going to move.
Okay. Is it necessary to thin cedar breaks to make room for oak trees? This question came up when you were talking about the reduction of the oaks in our area.
I don't know that that is recommended necessarily. I think of junipers being nurse trees and helping to create soil. So, long term, they're having a cedar break is beneficial because it's going to help create a thick layer of soil that then oaks can get established in over the long term.
Okay. So this next one, it seems that some trails or areas are protected more than others during the breeding season. Is this true? And if so, why? And the example they gave was like Bull Creek versus Wild Basin, for instance.
I think a big part of that is kind of how the lands became BCP. So there's some of the lands that became BCP were already parkland, and we don't want to take parkland away from people. It's kind of a grandfathered use, but the more that we can do to protect golden-cheeked warblers in their, the small amount of space that we're allowed to protect for them, the better.
Excellent. And unfortunately, there's still some questions in the chat, and I'm sorry that we weren't able to get to all of them, but we're right up against our hour here. So in respect from everyone's time, I'm going to go ahead and stop there. Jonny, I just want to say thank you for joining us today. It was an excellent presentation. This will be a great resource going forward when we post the videos. And yeah, thanks for joining us.